Okay.
I'm Gordy Bunch, and I'm running for Texas Senate, District 4. And what I want to tell all the voters in our district is a little bit about my background, who I am, how I see the needs of our state, and what I plan on doing when elected to be the next senator. I'll go back to when I was in college. I was 19, and at that time, in the early 90s, we decided that invading Kuwait was a bad idea, and we started a war. And that was Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And at that time, I felt compelled to go ahead and enlist in the military. I joined the U.S. Coast Guard. Our family has a history of service in the military. My namesake, my grandfather, is a World War II veteran. Did his time in Japan on the Japanese islands. My father, who I'm also named after, did his time in Vietnam. And when my time came to serve for my generation, I stepped up and I went in. Spent 4 years in the Coast Guard. In that service, I had patrols as much as saving folks in the Bering Sea from the deadliest catch, those fishermen boats, from hurricane response, Hurricane Andrew, I was a first responder, also working on search and rescue in the Caribbean. In 1994, I was part of the largest life-saving mission since World War II, Operation Able Manna. And that day we had over 3,800 folks that were saved, July 4th, 1994. As shocking as it was to see that kind of event, it wasn't the most shocking day of my service. The most shocking day of my service was the day I stepped on a human slave ship. Chinese mafia run, human trafficking, sex trade. Those are things that are occurring today, and those are experiences that I can take with me as we start looking at how our federal government is not protecting our state, they're not protecting our borders, and what are the damages that are being done to Texas economically, public safety-wise, and culturally by not securing our borders, not keeping out illegal human trafficking, not keeping out the sex trades, not keeping out the drugs. I think we need someone with a background and experience who knows how to fight the fight. After I came out of the Coast Guard, went from hero to zero. One of my issues that I want to work on with our education system. I spent 4 years of active duty service as a federal officer doing drug interdiction, human trafficking interdiction, and when I get out of the service, I get a DD-214, a that-a-boy, and all of a sudden I'm unemployable. None of my service training transfers into civilian qualifications for anything. So I picked up my bootstraps, dropped my sea bag off at the house, used my GI Bill, and went back to school. And while I was in school, I was going to learn how to get a new set of skills so I can be employed. And started off my insurance career in Conroe, Texas, with the Texas Farm Bureau. And got invaluable training from that organization. Really enjoyed my time there. They transitioned me to the civilian world. Not the Department of Veterans Affairs, not our state. You know, that was the reach out that lifted me up from going from being a hero to a zero. After spending time in the Texas Farm Bureau, I had a lot of success. I was one of their top producers in their district. I was attracted and recruited away to start my own district with another company, and spent several years doing that. Became well known in our industry. Then Prudential came knocking and pulled me over to Prudential. So I got a lot of business experience, you know, first as an insurance agent in the management, and then as an executive. And in 2001, I decided that I was going to start my own company. My wife was just had our first child. The company was going public, and I wanted to go ahead and go out on my own. So with $10,000, I set out and created the Woodlands Financial Group. From scratch, no other investors, no venture capital. Today, that is the largest privately held insurance agency in Texas for personal lines insurance. It's number 5 in the United States. Started from scratch, $10,000, 320 offices, 20 states, and that's just our retail company. I also created in the same time span a wholesaling company. We have 3,000 offices in 38 states. I also created a finance company. And because I have a little bit of boredom in my life, I also decided to create a software company. I have completely vertically integrated my business. The last piece of our puzzle is a risk-bearing entity and insurance company, which during this election, I will actually resurrect the oldest insurance company in Texas that I acquired in 2009. I'm capitalizing it, and I will launch it before our election day. So while we have people talk about creating jobs, I would create more jobs in this election than anybody else who's running for this seat. And I will continue to create jobs personally and create legislation that supports jobs when I get to Austin. So beyond the business world, I got married when I was 22. Last year I was in the Coast Guard, married my wife. Today we have 3 children, Riley, Jake, Greg, 7, 9, 14. And they're the real reason I'm running. Because all the experiences I've had in my life, all the opportunities that I've been given in my life, I don't see that future for them today. The business I just shared with you that I grew, I would not have the opportunity to build that business in today's environment. Mandates from the Affordable Care Act, penalties for not having insurance, risks that I was willing to take that allowed me to start up a company from scratch with no other capital, are risks that we're taking away from our kids. If they have the gumption to go out there and do it on their own, we need to leave that right intact. And I don't want my kids to wake up and have everything given to them. I want my kids to work. And they need to have an opportunity to earn, and have an unlimited opportunity to earn. That's what motivates people. And I don't see that the current environment is creating that. We have Battleground Texas. Everybody knows Battleground Texas. What's happening in Texas? We have a demographic shift of certainty in the next 4 years. We need to have an outreach to the Hispanic community in order to keep Texas red. I am Hispanic. I am 50% Mexican American. I am one of the few Hispanic politicians in the state that understands that the culture of Hispanics lines up with the core values of the Republican Party. The right to life, the work ethic, the taking care of your family. These are all things that Hispanics believe in. They just aren't being represented and reached out to by folks they can resonate with. I think if we're going to have a battleground and we're fighting for the heart of America, I think we should be putting veterans and warriors in positions to fight. And that's why I've offered myself up for Texas Senate. I might have ran over.
Okay, just a little bit. Thank you. And this thing died, well, it didn't die, but, okay. What we're gonna do is go around the table. We'll start with our questions and up to 2 minutes to answer them. I'll try to keep this visible. Go ahead.
All right. I think in your questionnaire you talked about allowing funding for vouchers so that funding could follow children based on their parents' decisions. Would that extend to, say, religious schools and homeschooling and other alternative forms of education?
Yeah, when you're talking about the school choice, I'm looking at multiple options there. And one of the risks you have about making it too carte blanche is all of a sudden you have really wealthy people getting subsidized for private school. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what all the solutions are as far as how do you put the voucher system or how do you create school choice without creating inequities that are then abused. But I do think it's the parents' right to choose how they want to educate their children. You got to look at Common Core and C-Scope and all the intrusions that we have from state mandates and federal mandates and figure out how do we start teaching our kids what they really need to learn. I'm a financial planner. I'm a registered investment advisor. I deal with people with financial planning from, I have some college, no college, a MBA, a BA, a JD, and they have no financial competency. We don't teach basic life skills in school. And I want my kids to understand how economics works. I want to raise capitalists. And we're not doing that. We're not teaching them how to have a productive life. And what does it take to earn? And what does it mean to have debt? And how do you manage yourself Right now, all we do is teach to test. Every validation point's another test. You know, Common Core, you know, with that trying to minimize the expectations of education and bringing it down a little bit later, it's across the country. You know, Texas is one of the few states that's holding out. I was told by Barbara Cargill earlier this week, the chairman of the State Board of Education, that the SAT is gonna start lining up to Common Core. If the SAT lines up to Common Core, you know, how do we get past something we don't like, but our kids have to take a test to get into college? And if every other state uses it, and our kids don't, what's that gonna do to our scores? And I really think it's a shame that we're so focused on scores and tests, rather than can we turn out people into be productive citizens? What happened to the trade schools? Why did we get rid of vocational training? Not everybody is going to go to college, not everybody's gonna graduate from college, and not everybody needs to go to college. What we need to do is we need to have an educational system that understands that there is a vast economy, and there is blue-collar jobs and high-paying blue-collar jobs that we could be graduating high school kids into, that we can be working with the junior colleges for, we could be transitioning our military into, and we're not doing those things. So, you know, I know this question started off about school vouchers, but it's a big issue.
So, but I missed the
Well, you
answer.
carry on.
Okay, so was that voucher gonna go toward private schools and homeschools?
And my answer was it's a slippery slope. I don't have the answer of how
Okay.
that works. Because if you don't define how that would work, you could have wealthy people taking money out of the public school system to pay for their private school. And I don't know how you ever make that work. We have multiple private schools
So
locally.
it sounds like probably not.
Well, homeschooling is a little bit different. You know, there is no, but they're not going somewhere else. I think that we need to leverage some of the things, like we have is it iSchool here at Lone Star College, where homeschool kids can go there. It's a facility, it's paid for, and they graduate high school with an associate's degree. That's a good school choice option. Everybody should have the right to choose how they educate their children. As far as how the money flows with the child, those are things that have to be really thought out carefully. If we start pulling all the money out of the public school system that accumulated all that public debt that we all hate, what are we gonna do? We're gonna have empty shells with large loads of debt and nobody going to school there. So I have to really analyze, how do you do that? When does that make sense that we should say the money should follow the child?
Well, we should have come up with a better answer 20 years ago, because we are, you know, the answer is just not coming out, and the dollars keep coming, and we better figure out a solution quick.
Well, what I understand today is the money can follow the child if it's in a failed school district. And then it's how do you define what's a failed school district? And to me, when you don't teach basic life skills, like financial competency, and you don't have a track for all the students, because the pendulum swung too far, right? All of a sudden, late 80s, early 90s, everybody's gotta go to college, you gotta have 100% college-ready graduates. And it ignored the fact that that's not how society lays out. And that even though that's the best intention, you left out people that would have been more productive and launched in life had they been given a trade that they could have gone into and been working on in their early 20s. You know, I talk about our company, I talk about my life. I was 28 years old, and with $10,000 built an almost $1 billion company. Because at 19, I was given the ability to be an adult. The military allows 19 and 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds and 23-year-olds to be adults.
Mhm.
And somehow our education system, our college system, and the rest of society wants to keep people as kids.
So
And,
keep them in school.
yep.
That's our thing.
There are 320 offices, and that's amazing that you have come so far so fast. 320 offices, help me understand the insurance business. Are they like franchise, or are they company-owned offices, or how does that work?
Right, our retail side of our company is not a franchise system. It is one agency with 320 locations. I have operating partners in all those locations.
Getting back to school, give us an overview on C-scope and what you know about it and what it's doing or not doing in our schools.
Well, what I know about C-scope is, it's a curriculum that has been developed that isn't getting vetted, that tried to cut out the State Board of Education. And a lot of the materials that came out had wild inaccuracies in them, and we're really trying to teach a socialism, liberal viewpoint in our school. The easiest way to turn the whole country purple and blue is to get our kids. And it is our job as parents to make sure our kids don't get attacked like that. And a lot of the curriculum, needed to be pulled. I know there was a lot of action in the last session to try to minimize C-scope. People say it's gone. It's probably gone in the name of C-scope, but it'll reemerge as ACORN. Because those folks that are dead set on social engineering to a liberal mindset aren't gonna give up just because you got rid of that, right? The focus is now shifting to Common Core. And, I love the fact that the State Board of Education has volunteers that review the text, review the curriculum. I know it was one of the board, well, not the board members, but one of your members that really identified C-scope as an issue. And, very proud of is it Ginger Russell?
Yeah, she's a board member.
Yeah, I mean, fabulous, what Ginger was able to get done and bring awareness to. And it takes really people at the ground level to identify some of these issues. And so, I think if you start telling us that the Boston Tea Party was a terrorist attack and the American Revolution was a terrorist movement, I have a problem with you. So.
Okay. You had mentioned the sex trade and the border issue. What specifically, let's say you got elected and you went in, what can you do individually and in consortium with other senators to make something happen in regards to that as pertains to the border? I don't understand, if the federal government's not shutting the border down, why can't we do it as a state?
And that's really what I was trying to allude to. It's very disheartening to know that we have a porous border. The Texas border is so long that, the building of the fence that people want to do, it would take a long time to get there, and it may not even be effective at the end of the day. We have a beacon that attracts people to Texas.
Yeah, but what would you do? What would you do to stop the bleeding?
Well, we have a Texas National Guard that we can direct. We have the state police that we can use. We have every county that lines the border that we can provide additional assistance to lock down and patrol those areas.
Is that the governor or lieutenant governor, or can the state senate?
The state senate can put in legislation and can provide proactive ideas to promote how to address issues.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need the governor or lieutenant governor to tell me how to think. I already know how to think. I got my life experience.
Mhm.
I'm going to the Senate to bring ideas and put things on the table and say, well, why don't we do this? And one of the things is, why don't we put our National Guard closer to the border? They're not attacking us, in areas 700 miles away from the border. And it's a huge economic issue. Not just the drain on services and the ER rooms, or the strain on the services and the school systems, and then you put in the in-state tuition for the illegal immigrants. All these things compound, and that really takes away from the future of our state if we don't decide to solve it. I put out that, look, Texas needs to take care of Texas. If the federal government won't show up and do its job, we should do it for ourselves. That's our role as a state government. The 10th Amendment gives us state rights. And if the federal government won't enforce its own laws, Eric Holder is a nightmare, right? He chooses what he wants to enforce and what he doesn't want to enforce. And we have the resources, we have the entire constituency of our state saying, we want this. The federal government is not going to give it to us. We're going to have to go do it for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So.
The good news is Texas is one of the most financially stable states in the country. As a result, we have a lot of people moving here. Our cities are expanding constantly. We also have a lot of oil and gas development, and all of this is putting a lot of strain on our transportation infrastructure. So we need more freeways in our cities, and we have highways out in the field that are crumbling because of the heavy trucks. How do we address all of our needs of transportation?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. The first thing we need to do is stop the diversions. Right now, we have a per gallon tax that was supposed to be dedicated to highway construction and maintenance. It's 20 cents per gallon. That has been cracked, and 5 cents per gallon is going elsewhere. So if we can just start with, let's put the money back where it's supposed to be dedicated to, and then start from that point to say, okay, now what are our deficiencies? And we all agree that roads, water, education are hardcore, things that we have to provide as a state. I run my business based on needs, wants, and like-to-haves. And so our state budget should start with what we need. And if we need to have roads and infrastructure to support the growth of the economy and the people that are moving here, we need to prioritize these things better. If we need the water resources and we need the education resources, we need to start prioritizing our spending. When people say we're flush with cash, well, how much waste is involved in what we're spending it on? In our current township that I serve on, I shaved a percentage point off of our entire budget on one agenda item. One item. Now, I can't do that alone. Obviously, there's a board, but I had to have the experience and the knowledge to say, look, this isn't being done correctly. There's a better way to do this. Let's look at this. And proposed a totally new way to procure insurance coverages for our community. We were missing coverages. A year later comes around, $800,000 perpetual annual savings. Now, if you could do that in the state, if you can get that granular and pick away at things that are not needed or are done inefficiently, you're creating the resources you need to reallocate to the priorities. So you don't necessarily have to start off saying, let's raise, fuel taxes, or let's do, higher fees. Let's figure out where the waste is, prioritize the resources, and then go from there and look at it.
So I liked your answers. You had a lot of good answers in here. You had, on the issue of gambling and funding for it, you said that you wanted to continue to grow Texas' economy, the tax base. Our focus should be on strengthening our infrastructure, improving educational opportunities for our children. What do you mean improving educational opportunities for our children? Because, the more the state provides, we're trying to reduce government, not increase it.
Well, when I'm
what do you
saying
mean?
increasing opportunities for education for our kids, that goes back to school choice. That gives our kids more options on whether to go to school.
You also said maintaining a low tax. We might have a lower tax in California, New York, and Florida, but I don't think our taxes are low.
Yeah, when you look at the taxes, one of the biggest tax issues I have is our franchise margin tax. That to me is the most offensive form of taxation that we could ever possibly have created. The Texas Constitution.
I can see why you would object to that one.
The Texas Constitution prohibits an income tax. So legislators got creative and introduced the franchise margin tax. There was a giant budget shortfall, and we have a balanced budget amendment that requires our budgets to balance. When that shortfall was noticed in 2006, they tweaked the tax to expand who pays it. That brought me into the fray. I get taxed on my gross revenue, not my net profit. So we statutorily can't have an income tax, so let's get around that by creating a tax that taxes you whether you make a profit or not. That is disgusting. That is one of the tax areas that I'd be looking at repealing, replacing, or marginalizing the margin tax. So when I say keep taxes low, you can change that. I did leave the right to amend these things. I have a reducing tax, have reduced taxes, have fought to reduce taxes in the 2 years I had the ability to set a tax rate, and I would attack that one first. Other things that I would look at doing is the property tax. I think it's unfair to put up a system that says we can increase your tax by 10% annually because. And if you aggregate that, Texas has not had a big boom in real estate valuations. It's about to. You can't move 1,400 people here a day and not have property values go up. So we have a plethora of residents that are going to get the shocks of their lives year after year after year as their property values go up, and that hits their pocket. We need to look at how we can cap the increased value for taxation purposes, so our residents know and can plan better. Like I said earlier, I'm a financial planner. When someone goes into the distribution phase of retirement, they're pretty much banking on what their overhead's gonna be. And yes, we have some exemptions in the state that kind of minimize that for those seniors, but they also have kids that are depending on them as well. We have become a multi-generational society, right? I'm in the sandwich. I have my in-laws that live with me. I have my kids. And if you look around, you all know people that are retired and still helping their adult grown kids, because things will hit them. So even though it may not directly hit a retiree because of the exemptions that are out there and available, if it hits their kids hard enough, they're gonna be calling, hey, help us out. My property taxes went up 50% in 5 years because they could. So we need to create a stable ability for people to plan and look at a more reasonable annual increase versus the 10% that it can go up today. So there's 2 tax reduction ideas.
Jumping back to roads, what's your opinion on toll roads and do you like toll roads, or do you think we ought to have toll roads, or do you like having toll roads and then get them paid for and then a few years later come back and put a toll back on them? Give us an overview.
Yeah, the toll roads is creating a 2-class transportation system, and you only have to go over to Austin to witness it. I-35 is still gridlock. The new toll road 130 that's a few miles to the west or east of I-35 is wide open. People aren't driving on it, except those that can afford to pay for it. So I think, toll roads are good at financing construction projects and getting things off the ground where our state has no funds available because we've reprioritized wrongly our spending. So you have to find a mechanism to create the transportation corridors that you need. But at the end of the day, our entire population isn't going to be able to ride on a toll road. It's not economically possible. The concept of these things get paid off and then they get open up to the public, I haven't seen one yet. I haven't seen a toll road yet that turned from a toll road to a private road or to a public road. I mean, it may exist, but I haven't witnessed it. And, it would be nice if these toll roads would eventually revert to public transportation, and that would then create more additional options. But I haven't seen that happen. And, you can take I-45 or you can take I-35 and you can look at the toll roads that go parallel to those highways. Those who can afford it ride them, those who can't. I can afford to ride on the toll road. So for me, it's a great outlet to increase my commute time and my need to get around. But for the average Texan, it's not practical. If all your other expenses are going up and wages aren't increasing at the same pace, something will have to get cut. I think we need to have dedicated transportation funding. And again, eliminate diversions, revisit what the real long-term needs are, and instead of being 20, 30 years behind all the time, try to figure out how we can get ahead of that. Can you imagine what our country would be like today if we didn't have the National Highway Transportation built long before we needed it? You need to have people that understand that, look, prioritization for long-term infrastructure spending isn't about what do I need today. It's what do I need 5 and 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 40 years from now, based on everything that we know coming on. This booming population has been coming for years. It's not like overnight they all got on the plane and packed up the cars and came. Now we're behind, and these projects take decades to get off the ground. When the EPA blocks half of what we want to do, once we decide we want to do it, we have to get ahead of the curve. And toll roads is a way to address additional transportation options, but I don't think that's the total solution.
Just for information, in Dallas-Fort Worth area, I-20, east and west, what originally was a toll road, got paid off. 4 or 5 years later, it's toll road again.
So it's now the one that's I-30 is a toll road?
I think it's 20.
20's on the south side.
Mhm.
That's a toll road?
Mhm.
coming down?
So he's done some loop or something.
Okay,
I haven't witnessed one yet, but it's good to know if there is one out
Yeah.
there.
yeah,
And I don't know if it still is today, but it did change to a toll road after it had been private.
you alluded earlier to, 1% savings in the budget item at the township. Can you tell us what that was, and can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely.
Kind of savings.
It had to do with the insurance for our town. In my first year on our board, in September of 2012, I came into a board meeting with an agenda item that said insurance. When I got there, there was a pack of papers this high, which was our insurance renewal. It was going to be renewed in 3 days. And it was over $1 million expenditure. I refused to approve it. I excoriated our staff for even thinking that was acceptable. I told the broker who presented this to us that late in the game that it was irresponsible and it was unacceptable, and eventually they got fired. After that passed, because it ended up having to be put in place, but I refused to vote for that. I wasn't gonna be Nancy Pelosi and spend over $1 million on something and then find out a month later what I just paid for. But it did go through, we got coverage. I spent the next month reading all that and identified that our town was missing critical coverage that it needed. Our budget is over 50% sales tax revenue. If we have a hurricane like Sandy or Ike or Rita or Katrina, and we lose that income from sales tax, that will hit all the property tax people in our community. We needed loss of income coverage. We had none. If we have an event like Bastrop Fire, we end up losing a lot of our trees, or we have a flood and it wipes out our parks, we had no coverage really for the landscaping that we had put in, or those parks that we had put in for the surface turfs and for other things. You know, the business income was probably the largest issue. Getting coverage for the timber was another issue. We are the woodlands, at least the township that I'm on is the woodlands. We had no coverage to replant our trees if we had a wipeout like Bastrop. So after that process, I put together a proposal to say, look, this is my expertise. Let me propose how we can do this better. And that took into creating an RFP process to get away from using a single broker and actually going out to the broader market and having our insurance competitively bid, and also establishing what minimum coverages we need to have as a town. When all that analysis was done and completed, we ended up saving $800,000 a year on that single issue.
How were you able to increase services and get that much of a reduced rate?
That's how poorly it was done. Let me tell you something, having experience in the legislature or having experience on a city council does not mean you know your head from you know what. You have to have experience in the real world, in real life, and I run a real business. And I deal with commercial insurance, I deal with personal insurance, and I touch a lot of industries. So having that much exposure, it took me 5 minutes to realize it was wrong. But if you don't have a background in some of these areas, you're never gonna find it. I don't care who you put in that role. There's people that are great people up there, but unless they have that experience, they're never gonna find it. And if you go to Austin, you look around, how many people there have as broad of a background that can identify some of these needs? If you don't have that background, you're not gonna find the problem.
Okay.
All right. Related to some of the federal intrusions on the state, your answer seemed to imply that this was really an issue of Obama reaching in and everything. Do you think that the intrusions are limited to the Democrats and Obama, or is this a broader issue that's been inflicting us?
Well, the EPA has been around longer than Obama. We've had 2 decades of no reservoirs constructed in our state, which is why we're in a massive drought and water crisis. The EPA won't let us get off the ground any of our 18 sites that have been approved by Texas for the last 2 decades. I don't understand, eventually this goes back to Texas taking care of Texas. We have to find a longer term solution for our own water needs without the EPA, without the federal government intruding and imposing reasons why we can't take care of our citizens. So the EPA is one of those issues. The Affordable Care Act is a complete overreach. I'm a licensed insurance agent. I have to take tests, I have to take continuing education, I have to do background checks. We have navigators that are now selling health insurance, enrolling people in health insurance that have no background check, have no formal insurance training. And I just got cut out of an entire business model by the federal government who's supposed to have no oversight over insurance. Insurance has been state regulated as long as I've been in it. So, yeah, that's a little bit intrusive. And it's also putting me out of business in a complete line. It's been a complete failure. And if you look at it, everybody in Texas is suffering from that bill. Every group employer who has a health insurance policy is paying a subsidized $100 per employee for the next 3 years that goes into a pool to cover the losses for the insurance companies who actually take the exchange. Because they know actuarially there's no way you can offer coverage at a cost below what it costs to provide. So they're subsidizing it and they're hiding it in our group health policies. Individuals, that get their penalty, that's another piece of it. Trying to mandate expansion of Medicaid. Those are intrusive things. There's a lot of unfunded mandates that gets handed down to us. But, the EPA, Affordable Care Act, Medicaid expansion, not doing their job on the border, these are all huge issues. So it's not just what they do to us, it's what they're not doing for us.
But you can't think of anything before the Obama administration.
All that, the EPA's existed before Obama.
Okay.
I think his question was was it only the Democrats?
No,
Or was it
no,
Democrats
no.
and Republicans?
The EPA, if it was only the Democrats, we've had a presidential, or Republican-controlled Congress and Senate and presidency in the last 2 decades. We still haven't had a new reservoir constructed, regardless of who was in charge. And, if you go around and you look at societies historically, if you run out of water, they fail. And that was how the Romans rose, was through the aqueducts. Well, if we suck all of our aquifers dry and we don't have, surface water reservoirs created, what are we gonna do in 20 years, 30 years? Remember, I said I'm not doing this for myself. I have kids. And when they have kids, they'll be living here in Texas. I may be long gone before we're bone dry, but we already you can do the math. We're all made of water. The industry's using water. It takes a barrel of water to process a barrel of oil. And, our rice farmers south of lower Colorado, I know they're not in my district, but I care about them because they're business people. 3 years they've had no water to run their rice farms. 3 years. It's being prioritized to go to the city of Austin. They had longer standing water rights. Those were subverted, the greater good. These are all systemic issues that starts with the federal government and programs that do not make sense. When a clam has more right to life than the humans, that's an issue.
So let me ask kind of a 3-part question on that water issue. Well, I liked a lot of your questions. 19, you were talking about it was do you support or oppose Prop 6? And your basic answer is yes, you support it. You wanted to change a few things about it. You got that done. But you were for that. And let me preface the question: Do you agree or disagree with the statement that any government entity by definition is less efficient than the private sector?
Can you restate that?
So, do you agree or disagree with the premise that any government project entity is going to be by definition less efficient than the private sector doing that same project?
I've never seen anything the government does that's more effective than the private sector.
Okay. So then and I agree with that. So I was trying to think of a similar project. The Hoover Dam was a big project in the 30s, and it was a government project. I think it was like $49 million. In today's dollars, it's like $850 million. Yeah, I can see private sector being able to do that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not very many, but I don't see that something that the government has to do. I mean, if you know, anything that there's a need for, human-wise, I think the private sector can, you know, get it done, figure it out a lot more efficient than the government can. So in my view, Hoover Dam being a government project was a bad idea, and Prop 6 too, I view that as a bad idea. So, what's your response? I mean, how do you defend
the
these
response-
government projects?
Sure, the way the law works is all surface water that's trapped belongs to the state of Texas. So if you want to get a private sector solution, it has to be a public-private option. There is no total private option, because as soon as you trap the water and it has above a certain size, the state owns it. So if we had the ability.
So the state is basically saying that, you know, any water project, we're gonna lay claim to it, and the
Over
private
a
sector
certain-
cannot get into our market, basically, right?
Correct. So.
Change the law, right?
Well, the water rights go back hundreds of years to different landowners for the use of the waters that run through their property. So now you got property rights for personal property that is supposedly protected by the state. And as I alluded to earlier, the farmers have the oldest set of rights. So to do anything private, you would have to basically eminent domain somebody else's right to put it into somebody else's hands, which the state is somewhat doing with cutting off the water supply south of Austin and drying out the farmers for the benefit of the city.
Yeah, so now government's gonna decide who the winners and losers are.
They've been doing that for decades. I don't
Exactly.
agree with it,
Yeah.
but I'm just trying to point out the complexity of water is the way the law is written today. Because I asked that same question. So, well, you know, I just go build my own water supply. Why not? You know, I got a backhoe, let's go. Well, if it gets to a certain size of a reservoir, the state ends up owning all the water you're trapping. So, you know, in order for it'd have to be a private-public type environment. There is no total private solution outside of changing federal law and state law that allows the private sector to be able to develop water resources.
Yeah, I just, okay, go ahead.
That's the only
Yeah.
way to win.
So,
Along that line,
time-wise, we got,
we got 5, 10, 15 minutes thereabouts, including the 5 minutes,
okay, so we roughly 10
10
minutes.
minutes. Along that line, give us your evaluation on what's happening here in Montgomery County with our water, with the pipeline coming down, the water plant.
You have the San Jacinto River Authority in Montgomery County doing $2 billion of pipeline from Conroe down to the Woodlands muds. And that was part of a long-term, you know, groundwater reduction agreement that goes back, 15 years. And it's now coming to the point where, based on the volume of water usage, this area had agreed to get off of groundwater and go to surface. The reason they chose the Woodlands to pipe down to is it was the most effective way, apparently, to aggregate all the usage in the shortest number, or the smallest number of users. That $2 billion project cost is going to be spread out through the entire county, right? So it doesn't matter that the water is going to end up in the Woodlands. Every water user in the county is going to get hit with a cost. And the cost is expected to go up 300%. 300%.
So why didn't the voters in
time
Montgomery?
300% increase is what the water bill is anticipated to go up by the time the project comes online. This goes back to, why do we have to come up with a way to get away from the federal government keeping us from adding there's other watersheds in the county. We could have made another water reservoir between 242 and Wigginsville. You know, there's another watershed right there. We can't build it, you know. So what happens is we get behind so far where our water usage outstrips our water supply, and you end up with really bad solutions because the alternatives are being prohibited by the EPA. Won't let you build a new reservoir. The state's wanting us off the groundwater because the aquifers. If you take a look at the water tables from East Texas to West Texas, the east side of our district's pretty flush. The Sabine River Authority doesn't have a drought on their hands. You know, they're well above where they need to be for sustainability. They have spillover. Spillover means water that they're not capturing that could have been repurposed and used for industry, for farming, or for individual consumption. Now, that's a long way to build a pipeline from, you know, the Sabine River all the way over here. As you move west, we don't have that. We're still suffering from the 3-year drought. In Montgomery County, we are much better off than anybody west of us. But as the farther west you go, some of these water tables are at 30%. You know, some are in the teens. I mean, you know, if you look at it holistically, sure, we're in a better situation than most of the state when it comes to water availability, but we are a state. And do we want to, you know, dry out West Texas and everybody to the west of us? I don't think we do.
Do you think there was enough evaluation and looking at the aquifers?
I know that there was a couple aquifers they drilled, the brackish water that they hit. The further south you go, because you get the salt intrusion, the cost to desalinate would have been higher than the actual cost of building the pipeline and flushing it down.
Yeah, but what about building the facility,
Building the facility to,
the water plant? So
that's part of that $2 billion project.
that includes that?
Yeah, but they did try to do additional aquifer tapping to see if they could divert to other areas. And what I was told is that there was too brackish. It would require desalinization, and that cost is higher than the cost of the water coming from Conroe.
What was the zone that you referred to between 242 and what?
It's a watershed. I mean, it's pretty close to I-45. It's probably right behind College Park, over to 13, 14. We could go down that way.
It might have been a case where some engineers on that would have
Evangeline,
been
was
helpful.
part of the Evangeline and Chico in that area. There's 3 zones in there, in the Evangeline, Chico, and one more. And then you got our Jasper. And then below that, you have the Catahoula, which at some point becomes brackish.
Right.
And so, well, I know all this was done before you came. I was just wondering what other reservoir there was there. I didn't realize.
Oh, it's not a reservoir. It's a watershed that could have been turned into a reservoir because it has the natural water availability to it.
Hmm.
So,
Do you know what the salinity was? Because the
This would have been-
benchmark's 1,000 people.
this would have been surface water that you could have
Oh.
captured.
Okay, so was it a lake or turned it
No,
into a
you
lake
have,
area?
yeah, you could have turned it into a lake based on the natural water.
Yeah,
A
like
lot of-
Grand Lakes,
Mhm.
Grand Lakes Estate, basically, in Wood Forest.
Right.
That's all a natural, actually, that was, the grand plan was to do it there first, and then they moved it up to Conroe.
Mhm.
I think George Mitchell had it moved up there because he had a lot of oil and gas wells in Grand Lakes, right?
Wouldn't surprise me. I wasn't around back then, but.
Yeah, well, that's why the lake's up there and not down here, but I think that whole area may be a watershed. But anyway, I know Michelle sent me something in addition to the answers. Now, you may recognize this except for all my scribbling on here. And it was township accomplishments, and my question is, 2 words.
Mhm.
Just put down there, you were a driver or you supported it?
Driver support.
You drove it
Right.
or you supported it? Lowered taxes 2 consecutive years.
I drove.
Okay, paid off 14 million of debt in our 2014 budget.
That,
For budget surplus.
that is a accomplishment that everyone shares.
Okay. All right, expanded public amenities, the sports fields.
I drove that bus.
Okay. Save the township 800,000, you said you drove that. Was that, okay, if we have time.
There's more things than I saved in that one item. It's just, I'm not gonna go back and read every agenda item that I cut savings on a park here or a park there.
Yeah. Created a resident amenity card.
Trying to make the best of a bad situation. We have those waterway taxis that we inherited. I was trying to get the ability for our residents to pay a nominal amount to be able to ride them year-round at a one-time cost.
Okay. Hadn't done that yet. Increased sponsorship revenues for CVB events.
What you have there is our Convention and Visitors Bureau. It's a separate board, so I sit on two boards. Today I'm the vice chairman of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. It's charged with holding events and attracting visitors to our local hotels. And in order to get them to spend money in our restaurants, spend money in our retail environment, as I said, we have one of the best situations. Over 50% of our budget comes from sales tax revenue, which is amazing. In call of all the other cities, they're all very envious of the way that we do that. Part of that is marketing our community. The CVB markets the community, markets conventions. We have a convention hall here in the Woodlands at the Marriott. And our job at the CVB is to make sure we attract large people to come in and bring their industry convention to our hometown. When they come in, there's hotel tax revenue, there's restaurant revenue, there's retail sales tax revenue. It's a great thing. We hold events, CB&I, Muddy Trails, 10 for Texas. We do the 4th of July. We have the ice skating rings. We have a lot of stuff that goes on at CVB. When I got there, I asked for a P&L. Show me the money, okay? How much are we spending on this event, and how much are we getting in return for sponsorships? A lot of the events are public events, but we're just doing it because the 4th of July is America, right? So we're not charging anything to come to those events. I looked at the events where we had opportunities and said we were undercharging or underrating what we should be charging for our sponsorships. So in a lot of cases, I would say, look, this sponsorship should, instead of being 10,000, should be 20,000. This sponsorship, instead of being 10,000, should be 20,000. Now, you can imagine how popular that is for folks to have their sponsorship they're used to paying less for, double in a single year. But I asked them to do it, and they did it.
Okay.
And so that's increasing revenue for our Convention and Visitors Bureau.
All right. And one more, say the parking limit by increasing rates. Support, or you were a driver?
I drove. Now,
Okay.
we have inherited a park and ride situation from Brazos Transit District, part of becoming a large urban area.